So I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order. I'm assuming this work session is on the document that's before me, an ordinance AO 2024-22, an ordinance amending the zoning map and providing for the rezoning from R3 mixed residential district to R4A multifamily residential mixed use district within Cook Subdivision Tract B, generally located north of East Tudor Road, east of C Street, south of East 40th Avenue, and west of Denali Street in Anchorage. This work session, we'll just do introductions, go around, starting with Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Cameron Perez-Verdia.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley. Meg Zalatow.
Christopher Constant on the phone. I believe we have Mr. Martinez.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'm not hearing anyone. So we also have staff from Heritage Land Bank, Planning Department, Community Development Services, and Real Estate, maybe?
Yeah. Petitioner representative with the Real Estate Department. I'm Bree Kiefer with Huddle.
Okay. Oh, with Huddle. Gotcha. Thank you. So I think that we're going to let the staff take off with this presentation. Ms. Alto and I are going to step outside briefly for a minute. We'll be right back, but please, you have the floor. Ms. Brawley, if there are any questions you.
Thank you, Chair Constant. Members of the Assembly, we are here for a work session on the rezone of what is known as the Archives property. Bree with Huddle was our contractor that represented us for the rezone. She's going to start with a brief introduction of the rezone, how we got here, and then I will kind of go through a timeline and next steps. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Bree. So I'm just going to go over a brief introduction. I know you guys are already pretty familiar with the site, and then a little bit of our process. So the site is about 9 acres, located south of the library, east of Cuddy Family Midtown Park, and surrounded by commercial development in the core of Midtown. Right now, it's R3 mixed residential district, and the proposal is R4A multifamily residential mixed use. And that's really tied to the goal of this rezone, which is to promote residential in the heart of Midtown while creating opportunities for compatible commercial uses. And that's what R4A really provides. R3 has much more limited some commercial opportunities, but not as much as R4A, and R4A still has a robust requirement for residential. And looking at the surrounding elements, in terms of where residential could go in Midtown, it's really a great opportunity. Obviously, there's the library and the park right next door, but there's even a grocery store within walking distance, hardware stores within walking distance, and then it's really an employment center. So there's an opportunity to live in Midtown, work in Midtown, and recreate in Midtown. In terms of the 2040 land use plan, the site is designated both urban residential high and residential mixed use overlay. And 2040 explicitly states when those two designations are identified that R4A is the recommended zone. So this rezone will bring the site into compliance with the 2040 plan. And that's one reason why we don't have to go through a comp plan amendment. And just to add to kind of what's surrounding it, yes, there's those amenities I discussed, but then generally the zoning also complements creating a walkable area for the residents with B3 surrounding and some PLI. In terms of our process to date, we presented at the Midtown Community Council back in October of 23. They were very supportive and provided a resolution of support. We presented at the Planning and Zoning Commission in January 24, and they also passed a resolution recommending approval. In terms of our process through planning, the planning department has been supportive of the rezone, and we didn't receive any objections from any of the departments reviewing it. So with that, I'll end there and turn it back over to Tiffany.
Thanks, Bree. So you should also have a simple one-page kind of where we are, current action, and next steps. Currently, we have an appraisal that's being completed by a third-party appraiser. We anticipate that that should be completed around April 16. Assembly action on the rezone is scheduled for April 23. Next steps would be roughly the first week of May would put the property out for competitive sealed bid sale based on fair market value as determined by the appraisal. Bid opening the end of May. Authorization for disposal introduced at the June 11 assembly meeting. And then after assembly approval and depending on financing types, closing would be anticipated in July or August.
Great, thank you. So thank you for the timeline. This is much appreciated. There's been a lot of public interest in this parcel. I have Ms. Brawley in the queue, but I had a few questions here, and I don't know if we're going to get into it a little bit later, but the first week of May, property out for competitive sealed bid, we had heard that there could be two alternatives on how this property could be disposed of, just straight on the market or actually with some requests for how we want it developed. Would this have particular development requirements in order to be able to purchase the property, or is it just straight disposal?
It would be a most likely a straight disposal, but we could put things, I mean, we can tailor the bid package to how we want.
Okay, I guess I would like to know more about that prior to May 1st. And probably, like, while a rezone's just a rezone, thank you, John Weddleton, I think I would want to know, right, if we're rezoning it as the municipality, we're paying to go through the rezone process. I would want to see something attached from why we're rezoning it to the disposal, right? Otherwise, why did we rezone it? Other than to possibly make it more valuable to bring in more money for the municipality. And I don't get that that's the sense of why we're rezoning it. I think there's a vision for this property. And I would really like to have a broader conversation about that. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. I have some questions that I'll hold for a little bit later because I understand we're also going to hear from the Friends of Rish Creek folks. But I guess my question in the meantime is, so I understand that this would then comport with the 2040 land use plan, which is great by upzoning it. I also want to make sure that there's been discussion about kind of what types of uses may be considered mixed use there. And I bring that up because as I think has been talked about many times before, often building something with retail on the bottom and housing on top is actually not financially feasible right now in our market. So I just want to make sure that when you're talking about residential, maybe you could talk a little bit more about the types of things you would maybe want to see there, knowing that of course it would depend on someone bidding and actually doing the work to plan it out. So I don't know if that's a question for planning or HLB.
I'll take the first stab at that question and maybe have Dave chime in, but my understanding is the rewrite of R4A does allow horizontal mixed use, which could avoid that financial issue. And then there's no requirement for commercial. There is a requirement for a certain level of residential. I don't know if you have more to add to that or.
I actually I would agree with Bree. You know, the horizontal mixed use would be something we'd want to see there. In fact, we did do a design charrette a couple of years ago with the previous HLB director that looked at really residential in the back nearest the park, commercial nearest Denali. It was a horizontal mixed use development. There are a whole host of commercial uses that are allowed in the R4A, and so we'd be open to any.
And then just a follow-up too, is there, I know this property's been discussed for several years now. Has there been any kind of prior even testing of the zoning to say, you know, hypothetically, this could have as many as X number housing units, or what's the minimum that would be required? Or is it just that it would be required to have residential? I'm just trying to understand, like, what's the scale of possible housing? Again, knowing that it would take somebody, you know, doing that work and actually bidding on it to determine that.
The minimum is 20 dwelling units per acre. So if it were like looked at as the site holistically, 178. And then in terms, I think just getting back to what Dave said, the planning department has done some kind of charrette style exercises on the site a few years ago, trying to kind of think through what that could look like.
Ms. Alto.
So I guess I'd like to know what precipitated the rezone by the municipality, why we're rezoning it. This is a really like hallmark piece of property for Midtown. It's next to some of our greatest assets, the Lusac Library, Cuddy Park. We know there's a kind of a master plan in place, or that might be the wrong word, well, a plan in place for Cuddy Park with the ice chalet. So I guess I'm interested to know kind of what consideration of the surrounding environment was made in determining that R4A was the right rezone target. And really, right, I understand there's dwelling units required, but there isn't any other use required. So, right, there has to have been some contemplation, though, of what those other uses might be. And I understand a rezone is just a rezone, but you want that A part of R4 because there's some kind of idea of what is envisioned. And I guess because we don't have those prior charrette documents, we don't have that information. I guess knowing the vision for the property is really important to me. This is, the heart of Midtown and is a very visible piece of property right now. And so I really, in order to be comfortable with the rezone and comfortable with kind of the plan moving forward, I need to know, how does it benefit Midtown?
So none of the charrettes that I saw had specific businesses in mind. There was, talk of coffee shop, restaurant, that type of stuff, but nothing I saw had hardcore listed what types of businesses would go in there, unless you recall anything. Okay.
No, the design charrette that we did had retail restaurants nearest Denali with multifamily development nearest the park. In fact, I think there was even a proposal for structured parking in the back as well. In terms of actual uses, we did not identify specifically what sort of uses we were looking for there. Just trying to put together some ideas.
Okay, thanks. I guess, with such an important parcel in Midtown, these are fine mixed uses. I'm not sure they're all that additive, particularly keeping in mind that there are a lot of these types of businesses just a block over, facing Old Seward. So right now, I'm not necessarily uncomfortable with the rezone, but I'm definitely uncomfortable with the follow along steps without more vision for this parcel. I'm not comfortable disposing of it with just it's R4A and let's see what the market will do, because we're not seeing the market drive the building of housing or commercial development right now, not without substantial subsidy or tax abatement. There isn't a tax abatement opportunity for Midtown. For residential, unless this happens to be an opportunity zone. I don't believe it is. So I don't see how we get the vision done by just putting it out to the market. And I know this is about the rezone and not the subsequent pieces, but I know this is driving the subsequent pieces.
Mr. Presverdia.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I want to stay on that line of questioning for a second. Why now? What precipitated this? Why is this rezoning happening now as opposed to later or earlier?
I would say we've been talking about this rezone, and we actually had done previous work to rezone it to R4A, and R4A was undergoing a change at the time. So it's not just something we kind of, we didn't just throw it together. It's, we've had this on our agenda for quite some time. So just trying to follow through and see it through.
And so are you saying there's not a sort of an interested developer, someone who's come forward, there's not a vision for this, there's nothing that has sort of That's what I'm curious about. And if there isn't, it's fine. It seems like that's often what happens is that a developer comes forward and someone's interested or something is happening, which is exciting. And then it goes, well, we need to get this rezone done. So we can create the opportunity for that. But that's not the case here. This is just at this time. Is that
Correct. We didn't have, this isn't a result of a developer coming to us to have it done.
okay? Thanks.
Ms. Persody, I think there's an alternative drive. There may be, we'll see, if I see some names on a bid package, I'll have less reason to believe there wasn't someone, but I think the real mission here, the CFO might speak to, is the fact that we have a note on that property that's not small. We're paying for it. And the payments every month are costing us from our balance sheet, and there's no end in sight because it's years worth of payments. And so the drive, I believe, if you take everybody at their best motives, is that it's to fix the hole in the balance sheet that's bleeding money that shouldn't be. And so I don't want to speak too much for the CFO, but I think that's the rationale that I've heard now probably for 2 years on this piece of land. Am I wrong? Am I right? Yeah. That's right. So the CFO nods his head. So there's a financial interest in the muni in taking this off of our balance sheet. Get it on the tax rolls. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Ms. Salaton.
So I guess, do we think that R4A will solve the issue that kind of made the prior deal fall apart, right? Like I understand, like Cook Inlet had mocked up some housing on this parcel previously, I believe, and it just didn't pencil. So it is adding the A something that is going to help make this pencil versus just residential. I don't know. I know there's been a prior attempt at trying to figure out how to develop this parcel, but it didn't pencil then. All we know now is costs are higher. So again, I'm stuck with the feasibility. Like if we make it 4A, right? I am really reluctant to go through rezones and disposals where things just sit. I am a huge fan of a reversionary clause of like 5 or 10 years, because if we are disposing of municipal assets, I want to see them produce something for, the public interest. And housing is definitely in the public interest, some of these commercial uses. And I understand it's been confirmed that like the health clinic portion of AHD could possibly go in R4A. All of those are really great, but are we going through an exercise that's ultimately futile? Like, that's what I want to know. What has changed from the prior attempts, or what other things are we going to bring to bear to make this actually feasible? And if the A in R4A is a really big part of that, I want to know that and kind of get a better sense of that. Otherwise, I don't feel like this is a real project.
I'm not aware of previous attempts to develop it, so I can't speak to that. We do add revisionary clauses to a lot of our disposals, so that's not.
That's news to me, because every time I've tried to add a reversionary clause, I've been told, no, that's unworkable for a developer, and we can't do that because there's an entitlement process or there's something else. So, I mean, I'm glad to hear that, but that's not usually the case. And we've seen disposals of municipal property happen where it's been 5, 7, 10 years and nothing's happened. So, I mean, this is such a prominent piece of property. Like, whatever's going to go here needs to be able to go and go in the next 3 to 5 years, like quick, in my view. And right, without a plan, I have a hard time believing that that's going to happen. I mean, I've talked with Cook Inlet about this parcel. I've talked with others. There's just, they say it doesn't pencil. So I guess I'm still really wanting to know, why will it go this time if we rezone it? Because the only reason we're rezoning it is so we can dispose of it, is my understanding. If it's just to tick off a to-do list thing, I think, right, if it's just because we always wanted to go down this path to rezone it to 4A, I have broader questions about, did we think about internal disposal, not internal disposal, but internal uses for this parcel, right? It is next to the library and a park, right? This is a small municipal area. I don't know. I just feel like I don't have the vision and why we're going here versus any other thing that I can think of that could benefit Midtown.
the vision was that it would be rezoned R4A so we could encourage residential mixed-use development in that area. We felt like that was a good fit for the area. And so that was the vision.
Okay, well, at this point, without more, I don't even know I support the rezone. I just want to let you know that. I'm going to give you the opportunity to give me a broader vision. A vision of just the rezone isn't a vision. This is to me, this is a significant municipal asset, particularly for my district. And I understand there are challenges with it today, but the challenges with it today should not drive quick disposal just to eliminate those challenges. There are other tools for those challenges. So I really ask you all to go back and think about why I can go to not just the Midtown Community Council, but all of my neighbors, right, and say, this is exciting, this is worth doing, versus because we're hoping it might be developed.
I have a question, unless you can respond. I mean,
I was just going to add, and maybe even Dave can speak to this too. I mean, a big difference today is that the R4A district was rewritten in a way that is more compatible with development. I think that was an issue of the previous R4A. People just weren't seeing how that zoning and those restrictions were could be developed, and people were having issues making it pencil. But that whole rewrite effort's goal was to create a zone that was desirable and more feasible for development. And I think that's one aspect tied to the timing, but.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add, but that is exactly correct.
Okay, I'd love to know how many building permits have been issued for R4A lots since the rewrite. Like, I'd like to know, did it work? Because that's the thing, we think something will work, but has it worked?
Well, this property being rezoned to R4A would only be the second rezoning to R4A that we'd have in the municipality. The other property is at Chugach Way and Arctic, I believe. It's the J.J. Brooks. And he hasn't come in with a building permit and plan as of yet.
Okay, thanks.
so I have myself in the queue, then Ms. Brawley. I have two questions. Then one is the assertion that was just made, and I have no reason to doubt it's factually correct, that the intent of the R4A changes were to make properties more desirable and feasible. So it might be beneficial to have somebody describe what changes were made to make it more beneficial and feasible to develop. That's one question. And then the second question I have, we have seen with the number of rezones where a property's value has changed because of the zoning designation, where there's a substantial change in value that goes from, it was one of the lots, I think, off of Old Seward down by Dowling, that went from one residential zone or a commercial zone where a junkyard was to a residential zone, different, where the property value just spiked, it went up. So is this action going to change the value of that property, the underlying assessable value? And if so, how? So those are the two questions. What is desirable and feasible about the new R4A versus the old? And what is the impact on the value of the lot in relationship to the change in zoning?
I suspect that it's more valuable, but I could follow up once we get the appraisal.
Can't you do some general analysis before appraisal? Because you get an appraisal when you go towards sale. And so I would like to understand the implications of a change from the current zoning to the next zoning on the value of the property, because that may inform the valuation of a property as you list it, not what we owe on it, not what it's currently assessed at, but what would the change be? Does it become more expensive or more of an asset that we're transferring because we keep the price the same? Like, my mind is trying to understand what are the ramifications, make the zoning change, list the property because of that change of zoning on value. So, and then the second, so I would like that analysis if it can just be generalized, doesn't have to be lot specific, but zone specific. Then the second part is what's more desirable about and feasible about the new R4A as written, because frankly, projects come and go in our mind. We get so many of them.
I would probably have to defer to
Defer to
planning.
Dave. It's fine, Mr. Whitfield.
Mr. Constant, that's a great question. Unfortunately, my office did not manage the R4A rewrite, so I don't have particulars, but we're certainly willing to get that information for you.
Right. So this Hitchens quote of an assertion made without facts can be dismissed without facts is one that's been playing in my head a lot of late. And so if this property is more desirable and feasible, I would love to know how. Right. So that would be helpful. And I'm not saying you guys didn't do something. I just need to know because it's being asserted that this change will do that. I want to know how. And so what is the value change and how is it more feasible and desirable than it would be otherwise as the current zone? Thank you, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, I have just I guess two specific questions. One, I'm looking at the land use map online right now and just trying to understand there's, maybe you can go back to the map on there. So what are because I see it's like brown with white dots and I saw there's another property that says that nearby. I'm just wondering is that the urban residential high?
Yes, the brown is the urban residential high, and then the white dots is the residential mixed use.
Thanks. And then the other question was on R4A. So did R4A already exist and there were changes made to it, or was it the creation of R4A? I guess I just want to understand. And when did that happen? Because I wasn't really tracking that, I guess, a few years ago.
That's a good question, Ms. Brawley. The R4A is a zoning district that was created under the Title 21 rewrite. We had a couple of developers interested in that, and from a feasibility standpoint, they couldn't make it pencil. So we went and took a second look at it. And so what you see today are the results of our work on trying to make development in the R4A more feasible. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. And then so it existed, and then you said there's two properties now that have it. I guess I'm trying to understand the sequencing of when the zone was created, when individual properties were zoned that might not this one, but ones that already happened, and then changes that were made to the zone. I'm just like, what sequence did those happen?
Again, a good question. The JJ Brooks property was rezoned to R4A right around the time that we identified a need to relook at the R4A district and make changes to it. I think he rezoned right at that time that we started working on that project. So this would be the second rezoning to R4A that would occur.
Okay, thanks. And then when changes were made to the R4A district, then, I mean, we don't have to go into detail what they were, but those did not necessitate another rezone, is that right?
That's correct.
All right, so I did have a request by a member who couldn't be here to offer the floor to folks from the Friends of Fish Creek. So come on down. There's an open mic here.
Can I just sit there?
Yeah, no, it's fine, yeah. Watch out for the cable here, don't trip over it, please.
I'll be the disruptor.
Mr. Deck, you have the floor. It's good. There you go, pull it close.
Well, I've never been called gentle, so thank you. Thank you for having me for this discussion. I appreciate your attention to the topic. Today I represent Friends of Fish Creek, which is a grassroots nonprofit advocating for daylighting of Fish Creek. The concept of daylighting, basically it's an infrastructural and economic incentive which has ecological and social benefits. The idea is that a creek should flow on the surface, should not be in pipes, should be an asset to the community, and should foster economic development as it is entering the areas where it happens. I'm really glad that Bree pulled up this map because it shows the actual corridor. And what we hope to do is influence this decision for the rezone to set aside a future creek corridor. And we had a proposal to call it a creek corridor reserve easement. And the purpose of that would be that when Fish Creek actually emerges from the pipes on the 40th, we actually have a place to put it. and don't have to go back to repurchase the portion where it would live while you have the property in the public hands. So the proposal would be to look at the archive site in a way that it doesn't impede development. That's a very crucial aspect of this proposal we have, and allow even the rezone or the R3 as it is today to foster housing, which would build constituencies next to Midtown Park. I'm not getting old enough to say that 20-something years ago, I was part of that group, which is called the Midtown Park Trail Subcommittee of the Parks and of the Parks Commission. And that was instrumental to actually purchase the 9 acres, which is adjacent to this parcel, and then get into the development of Midtown Park with the future vision that we do have a green space, and the current vision that we have the green infrastructure corridor, which then allows trails and other amenities to be built for the benefit of Midtown, which is actually lacking of those amenities. So our proposal is to encourage you to take a hard look of how you want to dispose this parcel, but keep in mind that we would like to set aside land. So again, we don't have to go back as the public to repurchase the same land we already own. And in our view, the best way to do that is that you create a creek corridor reserve easement, which is perfectly reasonable to place on a parcel, and you can execute it in your when you go through the sale. And how we proposed it, I'm not going to get into the details, but we are aware of the archives parcel development. Actually, when John Rubini and Leonard Hyde was working on that project to upzone for B3, which never actually finalized, we were part of that discussion, and they, in exchange for support, they actually contributed to the development of Midtown Park. In this case, because there are already building pads and parking lot pads developed. This is a wetland system which has been basically altered enough, but any good developer will use that existing infrastructure and use the existing pads to develop whatever they do, because that reduces cost. What we propose is to stay out of those and be along 40th and Denali to a depth or to a width which is sufficient for a creek cross section, and enable the whole corridor idea to be implemented. So I'm here to answer questions for sure, but also here to strongly encourage you to make this part of the sale.
Ms. Branca.
So how much of the acreage would need to be set aside for this creek corridor easement?
Currently, we have a preliminary feasibility study for what cross sections would work in this area of the creek. This picture will be helpful to see the corner of 40th and Denali. It's a green patch, and the north side of half of the north side of the parcel is a green patch, and half of the east side of the parcel is a green patch. And that area would be the place where we could probably best manage the creek daylighting, for the simple reason that it connects to the existing infrastructure and gets to Cuddy Pond on the west, but also that there is probably the most feasible way to find a route to go to the east. If you look at north of Home Depot, there's a parcel which is undeveloped. It's owned by Home Depot. And then if you look at further east from there, there's that little pond south of the office building that used to be a pond, an actual pond for the creek system. So somewhere we're gonna have to get there, or somehow. And the routing for that reason on this parcel at hand would suggest that a corner easement would be probably best used and impede the development the least. And the size of it is probably 3/4 to an acre. So when I drew up a preliminary plan, it would be about an acre. That's probably a safe number.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question, and then I apologize, I'm behind. I'm going to send the piece of paper that I'm holding so that we can post it, but it's essentially just the location of that proposed easement. And I'm sorry, I'm behind. My computer was bricked for like an hour. Anyway, so I have a couple of questions, one for Tamasha and then also for staff. And before that, I'm just going to read short portions of the land use plan because I think it's important to see the language. I was just looking through the 2040 land use plan. So one is there's land use plan policy 7.1. It says preserve, accommodate, and contribute to the character, scale, and identity of established neighborhoods as new infill housing and mixed-use development occurs. I'll acknowledge this is not necessarily directly germane to this property, but there's also this line, protect and restore the natural environment as development occurs, again, in these neighborhoods. So it's more specific so I'm surprised to see it so specific, but it really speaks to this word restore. To me is interesting that it was chosen because it says not just let's keep what we have, but also to literally restore the natural environment. So I don't know the full intent of that policy, but I want to point to potential relevance for this because of that word restore. And then I just want to also point folks to pages 62 and 63 in the land use plan. It describes this greenway supported development. And if we could go back to the land use plan map, zoom in, because it shows basically a portion of the site is covered by that because I assume because it's talking about the restoration of Fish Creek in Midtown. And then it says that this greenway supported development essentially identifies where a development will incorporate natural spaces, creek corridors. They're a development concept that allows for creek and greenway restoration. And then there's more language I won't read, but it does talk about daylighting creeks. It says restored or daylighted creeks can reduce pollution and flooding. It points out that there's drainage issues in places like Midtown, so that can help support reducing those drainage issues. And then it says that the GSD feature in the plan is redevelopment of existing built areas and designated mixed-use centers. So that seems to be this area. And then it also says GSDs are not a regulation or a zoning district. Implementation will come through partnerships, agreements, and smaller area plans. It requires agency and funding coordination, public dollars, staff commitment, and long-term effort. So all of that is to say, has that been part of the discussion in this? Because it's clear that our plan points us to restoring and really, building out our creeks. There's pages and pages of pictures in other areas that talk about the importance of that. And this is one of those areas. And so it does seem like a missed opportunity not to basically record this as an easement. So I guess my question for Tamasha is, has that been discussed? And are there other options besides an easement? And then my question to staff is, how else would we implement the plan other than through things like this? And has that been discussed?
Thank you, Ms. Brawley, since you phrased a question to me, so let me start, and then I'm sure I need some help here. So the first step about, are there any other vehicles to do this? There are, but in this case, I think since you are in a land sale, if you want to parcel out a section which set aside as a publicly owned land, fee simple, that would take a planning action. I don't think it's the best way to do this. I think there are ways to restrict parcels which are sold in a way that you create an easement which then it lives on the parcel and it becomes part of the title as you sell it. So our view is that just as far as the ease of executing this and represent the public interest in protecting a space for the future creek daylighting, we thought that the easement has shown the most potential. It has been done before. Actually, I worked on other creek restorations as part of developments. That's not what I do for a living. It's not the fix creeks is the goal. It's what you do is do them as you do development. And this is very much the same, endeavor. As far as have we talked to the municipality about this? Just through our representatives. We have not yet talked to the administration about this idea, and we thought that this would be a terrific forum to start that.
Then I'll just briefly reiterate my question to staff. Given that this kind of thing is in the plan, was this discussed in the past? Has it been discussed recently? And do you see this as a feasible way to, again, partially implement our land use plan?
This was not discussed. I would love to see the document that you have because I haven't seen anything regarding it. So
Yeah, and sorry, I'm going to get it emailed to everybody. So, and this is, I know it's just a work session, so hopefully folks can look after the fact.
Ms. Salto, then Ms. Branda.
So what tools are at our disposal, both in the rezone or parcel disposal opportunities to protect this area? The easement, yes, I hear that, but we have basically a greenway supported development kind of overlay over a number of otherwise designated land uses. So is there a land use designation that would capture this particular use or this particular intended use outside of just simply an easement, right? I don't know. I don't know what tools we have. The easement feels all right, but it feels like maybe an incomplete remedy because it only deals with the portion of the parcel and only if it's subject to disposal versus this whole corridor, frankly, needing protection over time.
Through the chair to Member Zalatel, we can certainly take that back and look at it. I think, that's a broader question than the question of the rezone of this property because in part, the GSD is depicted, it infringes on this property, but it's much broader in this area. But we can certainly take it back and look at that. I would also offer that, as Chair Constant noted when he was exchanging nods with Mr. Thurn, that we have a $5.8 million debt on this property and an easement that infringes on the usable developable area of any property, reduces the value of the property. So if it were to proceed with the rezone and if it were to be sold, any restrictions on that limit our ability to pay off the workers' comp loan and that's a $5.8 million debt that we're facing and incurring interest on. So just want to put that back before the body as as your deliberations continue. Thank you.
Can I follow up quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Ms. Salto.
so I see that we have appraisal for after the assembly action on rezone. I'm wondering, can we inverse the operations? Can we get this piece of property appraised both as R3 and potentially R4A? So that we know, right, if this is a financial value proposition, right, balanced against a lot of other interests, the question becomes, and putting in the factor of possibly an easement, right? I think an appraisal can deal with a number of factors to say where they do or don't infringe on the value. I guess I would want to know that information because right now I haven't seen a high value proposition for rezoning to 4A as of today.
So the appraisal is currently underway and we actually should have it before assembly action.
Oh, okay. Can you make sure all of those factors are considered? So current zoning versus proposed zoning, the easement. I mean, because we need to get all that information and take it against the debt owed and the other broader interests, right?
Yeah. Yes, I will have to update our scope of work with them. So, but I will do that.
Is the current appraisal only as to if you made this R4A?
That was yes.
Wow.
It's helpful. Thank you, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, I'm still stuck on this plan and implementation thing. So it's Mr. Collies, you said that you're concerned, and I understand the concern that this would lower the property value, and I get that lens because it would reduce the number of acres you could build. There's this other restoration piece, but I'm reading from the land use plan, page 62. GSDs would enhance new construction and property values by attracting more uses, housing, businesses, and employment. So I'm asking if our intent is to implement this portion of the land use plan or not. And I understand there are feasibility issues with what has been proposed, but this isn't a publicly adopted plan. It literally has pictures from Thornton, Colorado, Caldwell, Idaho, and it shows pictures of restored creeks. And so it seems to suggest that it's a strong community priority to restore this creek. And so I'm just asking how do we weigh those priorities? I understand the issue of needing to dispose of the property. We're already paying for it. What this is literally saying in the plan is that we anticipate that property values would go up, which would increase our tax base. So not only this property, which I assume since it's publicly owned, we aren't paying taxes on it, period, right now. And then it would, in theory, increase the property values around it, which would increase the overall tax base, which is one of the basic theories of land use development, right? That you want to increase your tax base over time, where it makes sense. So I guess I'm just really asking, is the administration saying that you don't want to implement this part of the plan? Or how do we implement this if not through these individual properties where this exists on the map?
Through the chair to member Brawley, I believe what I'm saying is that the portion of the property that impinges on or that overlays the GSD depicted on the map it's a relatively small infringement or impingement into the GSD as depicted. And as we all know, any reduction in the area of developable land on a parcel is going to impact the sale price and the developability of that project. So, and I think those are relatively easily quantifiable by a developer. What I think is less quantifiable by a developer would be for developer X to say that the trade-off with an easement that limits a portion of the developable area of the property, how does that compare to having frontage on a developed greenway? And I don't know the answer to that.
Then I guess I would suggest this is on the map. This is a publicly adopted map. If we don't intend for that greenway supported development to, as you said, impinge on, which is an interesting term to use, to be on this parcel, then perhaps it does need a land use plan amendment to change the map to remove this, because I understand it's generally showing the buffer of where the historical creek. That's, I assume, why it's the shape that it is. But and then I'm just curious because it says this is not a zoning. Basically, the GSDs seem to be in the plan with no designated mechanism to implement them. We're asking how we could implement them. And again, if we don't intend to implement them, then we should start basically carving out pieces of this and saying that it doesn't actually apply on the map. Because I don't see how to square those two things. I understand what you're saying. I don't want to reduce the amount of housing, but then how do we restore and daylight our creeks if that is our policy intent in the plan?
I think Ms. Braga, I skipped you maybe.
Yeah, this isn't about the creek, but kind of. When I was looking at these papers, it says that R4A will have 20 units per acre. Is that something that is, if you have an R4A lot, you can have up to 20 units per acre? Or are we saying that that's optional, that's the max density? And if so, then I'd be, if we did the full acreage, that'd be 180 units. If we took the acre away for daylighting, it'd be 160 units. I think if we knew that this many units of housing was coming, that would be a very nice thing to see.
That's a good question, Ms. Bronner. The 20 DUA, dwelling units per acre, is the minimum for R4A. The R4 and R4A districts are the highest residential density that we have in Anchorage. So we would expect with any development that we see a large number of dwelling units.
So, but it's worth clarifying really clearly that this action will not predispose housing will be built there. And so maybe some level of units, not the amount, it just depends. The buyer buys it and then they make their proposal and then it goes through all the entitlement processes and whatever agreements and maybe variances they request or whatever. And so it's generally speaking, that's the plan, but it doesn't make that happen. So even if all of this is approved as presented, it's not a guarantee that we're going to see 160 or 180 housing units. I wish it was that easy. And I have just a philosophical question for my peers that has to be put out there. When we discussed my very important project for my neighbors, the creation of the park up on Government Hill, the Track J, the question was asked, and I'm not asking it to get an answer, I'm just asking it to make sure it gets asked. Is this worth sacrificing the potential for actually building housing? And so because it's in the plan, I get that. And because it's a value for a lot of people, I get that too. And all of our efforts recently have been towards the mission of building housing because of the housing crisis. And so I am balancing those conversations in my head. And I'm not saying I wouldn't support the easement or whatever vehicle we want to put there, because I do support neighbors and neighborhoods getting elements that make living there better, that it's not just one or the other. So that's just a philosophical question in relationship to this matter. So I don't have anyone else. Oh, Tomas, I'm sorry, Tomas.
Thank you. I would like to make a comment about the potential perhaps alternative way to look at what we are asking for. And for the simple reason that I'm in the same business as Kent we are, as an engineer, I'm a designer type, but we're looking for solutions. I think the solutions on this parcel have to be looked at through the lens of the land use plan, but also what's possible on this site. And if you look at development on an R4A, you're going to still contend with the zoning restrictions, which have to do with frontage, which have to do with setbacks, which have to do with a lot of things. What we proposed here is actually somewhat of an overlap of those. You have a frontage on Denali and you have a frontage on 40th, which already is in an area where the remnants of the wetlands are standing. There's no development, there's no overlay, there's no parking pads. And that will be very difficult to develop for actual housing because you simply can't put the house on the property lines or even the businesses. The other thing about restrictions about access, as you note on the plan, and thank you for the support staff here to print it out. But we do not restrict any of the existing access points. Denali Street has an access point today. It is continue to be there based on what we request. The access point into the parcel from the north is there as well. It's already built. It would be very unwise to change that. And any good developer will look at those infrastructural elements as part of their development plan, whether it is in existence today or they will develop it after the sale. That's probably irrelevant. The point is about the easement that we do have creek corridor easements in the code. What I'm hoping to achieve, thank you. What I'm hoping to achieve to convey is that we do actually have the vehicles to make this happen, and with the legal team, obviously that's going to take some work. But the point is that keeping land in reserve for a purpose which is already in the code, is probably a fairly straightforward way to try to implement this. And about the cost, as Kent pointed out. The sale, let's say if it's an upzone from R3 and R4A, let's see that you learn what sort of delta it has for actually a cost increase. It will still have to contend with those other conditions of the site, which if you look at the aerial picture, the site has developed this, the archives properties are built this funky shape. They look like, I'm not sure, like a rocket ship or something. That's the pads on the site today. Those are the pads on the site today. Large areas of this site are still in the original wetland system. So they will require significant investment to do the work. So this is where the appraisal will make some decisions of what the delta is for the upzoning. As far as the future development of the creek, the only reason why we would even ask for this, that if this parcel is developed in a way that it impedes the future implementation of the land use plan, as Ms. Prawley pointed out, it will happen. It's maybe not 3 years from now, but maybe 30. The point is that at a later time, the city will have to show up and start to purchase properties, which are by then probably maybe even multiples of the square foot cost. So it is wise to just go in front of that planning effort and do it now, even though if the balance sheet today would love a higher value. So I think I would encourage you to consider that, and hopefully we can come up with a solution, because I think these can be resolved, and
Tomas,
I hope
we're
we
going to
get
run
there.
out of time, and I think there's a couple more questions. I'm going to bump you there. Ms. Alatel, and then Ms. Brawley, and then myself.
Thanks.
And we have 5 minutes.
Okay, so to the chair's hypothetical question, I hope we can get to a yes and proposition. I think it's in the land use plan that living on the water is actually an amenity and it's a good thing. And actually, I don't think we've ever done a good job with that. My first home in Anchorage backed up to Campbell Creek, and I thought that was amazing. But the development across the way of that creek was really terrible and it was old, right? We don't seem to incentivize that development. But when I go to other places, being creekside or being trailside is a huge amenity. So I want us to, and I think the land use goals suggest that that's the case. I think, and if you have a different legal analysis, I hope you will bring it forward. This needs a land use plan amendment to ride with it if you're going to eliminate the, or if you're not going to protect the wetland there. Because frankly, it all falls within goal 8 of the land use plan. And we either require land use plan amendments or we don't. Also, it will then reset, if that is the administration's position, it puts us in the policy driver's seat, which is where we should be about whether or not to reframe that community expectation. Because I think what I'm hearing is if this portion of this parcel doesn't go or doesn't protect these wetlands, doesn't protect this access, it actually has implications for a broader project. And last, just so that you're not surprised if you bring forward the disposal, I really want you to think through whether or not a development agreement for this parcel, should it get rezoned and be considered for development, be done. I think there's significant municipal interest here, and I would really like to see that route. Thank you.
Ms. Brawley, again, we're running out of time. So.
Yeah, just, I mean, one option is this easement. I guess another one, I just want to ask if the real estate department would be willing to consider the idea of either putting in a preference, like when you're doing the scoring and how you're designing this disposal bid, could there either be a preference or a requirement that this creek option be incorporated into the plan somehow? So if it's not an easement, is that an option?
Yes, I think we could put something in this disposal paperwork or the bid paperwork.
And I guess, would you be willing to make it a requirement versus just a preference? A requirement that any development plan put forward here would need to incorporate or include restoration of this area?
Here's another question on that. Can the assembly require that through this process? Can that be a requirement we levy in writing through one of these drafts?
Through the chair, Ms. Brawley, let me see if I got your question right, Mr. Constant. Ms. Brawley, were you asking that when we get to a point of disposal, not as part of the rezone, that we require? Can maybe just repeat the question, because there's a couple ways, I think, as Assemblymember Zalatel, assuming the rezone occurs, we can go forward with a couple paths. One is just a straight sale with conditions, which that could be done, or when we put together alternatively a request for interest on how they might develop it. When the proposers come back, we could ask them to consider all of those things and what the pluses and minuses would be, not only with the with an easement or a set aside for some portion of this property for the creek, as well as for housing and other purposes. So I'm not quite sure what you're asking us to do.
I guess given that we're short on time, I'm just asking to kind of have some options for how we can operationalize or implement this policy in the plan on this property. And then my preference would be that it would be some kind of requirement and not just a please try to do it. And then of course, someone may or may not be able to make that happen. So we can't figure that out today, but I think there's some options that have been discussed. And again, I think the question is, do we make this a requirement because this is part of our land use plan? Thanks.
So I have another question, and it'll be the last one because we're out of time. But looking at the area that's hashed on the map to become this green space, and then hearing the discussion about other setbacks in the property relating to their proximity to roadways, needing frontage, and other elements that would fall within setback requirements and other development requirements, would there be a way to analyze the property and propose an alternative to meeting the setbacks and other elements. So reducing the setback requirements on other parts of the street front parcel street front, and then adding those requirements or subtracting, if you will, those requirements from the area that's being identified as a greenway or whatever easement is, so that what we can do from a net perspective is balance the interests and not actually restrict so much by providing alternative ways to balance the equation.
Yeah, Mr. Constant, that's a very interesting question, and I think one that would require some thought. But I think that, yeah, I mean, there is an entitlement process for reducing setbacks. That's through the variance process. And if one of the concessions, let's say, that came along with that variance to reduce setbacks was that we set aside land for this greenway supported development, we could consider that.
So
certainly.
then the question I would have is maybe somebody on your team can analyze this lot and see what some of the potential barriers might be that are relating to the setbacks and other code required elements, and then see if there is an equity that could be balanced that would make it more interesting for a developer while at the same time achieving the easement value.
We could certainly do that.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to adjourn this work session. We're going to take about a 10-minute break and we'll be back on the Heritage Land Bank's 5-year plan.